Well, hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Global Insights International Service Learning panel hosted by the National Youth Leadership Council. Today, we're gathering to explore the profound impacts of service learning around the world. NYLC has been at the forefront of empowering young leaders for over 40 years, driven by the belief that when young people are given the opportunity to lead, they become powerful forces of positive change. Whether it's advocating for social justice, supporting education initiatives, fostering a culture of inclusivity, NYLC is dedicated to creating a platform where young people are not only participants, but true leaders. So today's panel is going to be facilitated by NYLC's Youth Advisory Council member, Catherine Nguyen. Catherine is currently a junior at Clayton High School in St. Louis, Missouri. She's a leader in the Asian American Civic Scholars Group, an intern at the Very Asian Foundation, and actively supports her school's Asian Student Association and diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. Catherine brings a wealth of experience and perspective to today's panel, balancing her commitment to advocacy with passions in music, STEM, and literature. We're thrilled to have her here to share her insights and guide today's conversation. Catherine, thank you so much for doing this for us, for bringing your voice and inspiration, and for the advocacy you do in your own community. So let's get started with today's panel. Catherine, I turn it over to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for the kind introductions, Amy. Um, as she mentioned, I'm Catherine Nguyen, and I'm so excited to be facilitating the conversation and engaging in discussions with our amazing panelists and learning more about global service learning. So I'll first start off by introducing the panelists that we have today. First off, we have Sarah Stanlick, who is the assistant professor in the Department of Integrative and Global Studies and the director of Great Problem Seminar at the Rochester Polytechnic Institute. She is also serving as on the committee of steering committee for the community-based Global Learning Collaborative, and she has a lot of experience in publishing journals, articles in journals such as the Michigan Journal of Community Service Learning, the Social Studies, and the Journal of Global Citizenship and Equity Education. Her interest in global citizenship, health and human rights, transformative learning, and the internet's impact on empowerment and capacity to build community is a wealth of knowledge that I'm super excited to hear about today. So thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us in this discussion. Additionally, we have Felix Lorenzen. He comes from Berlin, and he is the managing director of the Foundation Learning through Civic Engagement in Berlin. He co-initiated both the translational project, Service Learning for Democracy in Europe, and the European Network for Service Learning in Schools and Organizations. A main focus of his work at the foundation is to help teachers implement service learning and civic education on European topics and to connect schools in Germany with those in other parts of Europe. Felix studied political science in Germany, Spain, Sweden, and the United States, and has been working in the nonprofit sector since 2010, with a strong emphasis on youth participation, youth mobility, and educational justice. So thank you, Felix, and we're super excited to have you from Berlin and learn more about that global perspective. Last but not least, we have Isabella Alcorn, who is from Brazil. She has a degree of law from the Pontifical Catholic University of Sao Paulo, and is a master's student in the postgraduate program in education, teacher training at the Pontifical Catholic University of Sao Paulo. In 2018, she co-founded the association Movimento Futuro, which aims to mitigate the soft skills problems of children, adolescents, and youth people through educational projects focused on developing life purpose and soft skills, as well as teacher training. During this period, she has written educational materials on soft skills, service learning for teachers, as well as earning international awards for these three areas. Additionally, she has been conducting teacher training on service learning for public schools in partnership with Klaus since 2020. Isabella is also a teacher of philosophy to students at middle school and high school. So with that being said, thank you so much for our three panelists for joining us today. This is going to be a super exciting discussion about service learning. Just a brief introduction about the topics we're going to discuss today. Today, we will explore international service learning through diverse lenses, focusing on how cross-cultural experiences can empower youth, enhance global understanding, and address pressing social issues. This conversation will highlight the best practices, the challenges, and the transformative impact that international service learning has on both young people and communities. So, personally, I'm super excited and can't wait to hear more about this. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to ask for each panelist to speak briefly for about 8 to 10 minutes about their experience with international service learning and their community impact. So if we could have a panelist volunteer to go first, that would be amazing.
I can go ahead and go first, and then I'll set expectations low, and everybody else can exceed them. So,
No, we're super excited. Okay, take it away,
okay.
Sarah. Thank you so
All right,
much.
thank you so much. And so I'll preface this by saying I've had a long career thus far in global service learning in a lot of different contexts. And so in my previous role, I directed a global citizenship program for undergraduate students who did intensive international service learning, experiential learning, project-based learning, and it was a small cohort-based program. Now I'm at an institution where this has been scaled and it's a graduation requirement of all of our students to do this integrated project-based learning that has a global focus. So with that, I've got this kind of wide view and kind of iterative view that's happened over time. And I've certainly learned and developed and honed my understanding and continue to grow. But today I will share briefly about my own, my current context at WPI, which is Worcester Polytechnic Institute. But then also just know that like we'll have conversation that'll draw from other places as well. So that's my quick caveat. And so I am at an institution where every single one of our students is STEM or STEM adjacent. I know that there's always a little bit of controversy there with our video game design students. Are we artists? Are we humanists? But in general, we have a deep core of technical and scientific and mathematical students who are pursuing their major. And I think it's pretty unique for students who have that type of focus to also be expected to do a deep core of project-based learning that has social science implications and that connects to the wider world. And so just make sure this is advancing right. So my question I'll just frame as, what does it mean to be a civically engaged global polytechnic? And that's how we think of ourselves. We, since 1970, have been overwhelmingly project-based, where students are pursuing passions, they have a global perspective, they're reflecting on the personal impact of this work. And in 2019, we finally put into our faculty governance and our student outcome expectations that all of our students would be able to demonstrate global and intercultural competency by developing these capacities to identify, explain, critically analyze all the many frames of what's happening in our world today. And one of the mechanisms by which we do that is deep project-based experiential and international service learning. And so we're hoping that our students can gain and evolve a feeling for themselves of a critical global citizen lens, their civic agency, their ability to use their training to do good in the world, but also to do so in a way that is critical, thoughtful, and is not represent or replicating kind of like colonial structures. And so the students have to learn through this experience how to, you know, productively balance creative tension between global action and local action in their backyards, and the assumption that you need to go someplace to do international or global service learning, which is not the case. We are multifaceted, multicultural communities, especially Worcester. And in order to build that viewpoint and that lens, students they don't have to travel. And I think that's one misconception that often pervades the global service learning kind of focus. We also want them to balance between action and reflection. We've got a lot of well-intentioned students who might want to change the world, but they also have to understand and appreciate their role in the world, many different historical contexts that might conflate or conflict with co-creation and work with communities, and also being culturally humble and understanding that they don't have all of the answers and that only through global interdependence and working with communities can they achieve the bold and wonderful visions that they might have. And so there's that piece of agency and interdependence. We want them to be confident, but not so confident that they're dictating or thinking from a top-down lens. Universities help communities to be better, really understanding the transformatively reciprocal relationships that we need to build. And of course, that constant challenge between intent and impact. Being well-intentioned doesn't necessarily mean you're well-informed. So I'll talk a bit about how we prepare our students. And we really focus on, through these different experiences, there's a first year program that I direct that students are engaged in community. We have a junior year graduation requirement where all students are doing a project-based research and service learning experience with a sponsor. So there's that community voice that is within that and co-created with community sponsors. And then they also have a major qualifying project that is more focused on their disciplinary background, but many also have real world sponsors and community partners involved. So we're hoping to develop students who can work with community deeply, who can work across interdisciplinary and disciplinary bounds, that they are scaffolded through the process of growth and development, that there's an emphasis on sustainability and co-creation, and that there's critical reflection built through all of the work that they do. And so one program I'll focus in on, Great Problem Seminar. It's a team taught opportunity that students do over 2 terms. We're on 7-week terms at WPI. Again, it's project-based, it's focused on sustainability and community partners. So for example, Worcester has a high houseless population who is that poses a challenge to our infrastructure, to our society, to the folks obviously themselves. And our students are working alongside the city to learn more about that specific critical global challenge, which is also within the Sustainable Development Goals, but by providing service learning and project-based learning and research in this specific container and working alongside the community partner. So we get about 1/3 of our first year students who participate in this program and set themselves up for this kind of development starting from day one. And we're hoping, again, that they're developing all of these different professional and personal identity development aspects to their work. The other part that I'll just very briefly touch upon is our WPI Global Projects Program. We have about 92% of our junior year students who work around the world. So these are just some of our project centers with community partners to advance some type of mission-based, interesting research and product. So students, for instance, we are in Berlin, where students are working alongside of organizations like Give Something Back to Berlin around refugee resettlement and how do you include and connect with newcomers to the city. And so they get deep preparation with a social science research class. They do this project and this deep engagement. They have reflection throughout, and they're working with a sponsor then to create something that is going to be usable and continuable by the sponsor. And I think I'm noticing the time, so I'm going to pause there and allow the other presenters to talk a little bit more about their contexts. But the 3 things that I wanted to kind of set the framing here is that we really are very lucky that we've got a comprehensive ecosystem that supports research and service learning across the curriculum. We've got values engaged at the center of co-creation, epistemic justice, community voice, and sustainability. And it really does go across the curriculum and all the disciplines with a focus on cultural humility and diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice. And we'll talk more about that as we go on, but that's my framing for right now. I'll kick it back to Catherine.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, it was fascinating to learn about the educational programs at the Polytechnic Institute and how being so STEM focused can still bridge out to different humanities and the global service learning and how you really support the students there. So thank you so much for that. Could I ask for Felix to go next, please? Thank you.
Of course, and I say hello from Berlin. First of all, thanks for having me. Thanks a lot for the invitation, and thanks for bringing together so many inspiring people. It was a pleasure to listen to you, Sarah. So as you probably know, it's already evening here in Berlin in November, so it wasn't such a beautiful sundowner as in the picture. And yeah, I'm just alone by myself in the office. No one else here anymore, but strangely, the bell rang. I will ignore it now and see who might turn up. Yes, I would like to not only share some experiences from our work here in Germany, but also go a little bit beyond and share some developments actually, which happened here in Europe when it comes to European or international service learning. Perhaps I will invite you to join me for 3 stops. First, I will very quickly tell you about service learning in Germany and what our role is. And then I will share some information on our new European network. And then I would also like to invite you to an offer of a transnational project we've been running recently. This is the map of Germany. You might recognize it. We are the central service learning actor in Germany, promoting service learning in K-12 education with many partners from civil society. Being located in Berlin, we also depend on partners in the region. And as Germany is a federal state, we also cooperate with the 16 or with some of the 16 ministries of education on the sub-federal level of Germany. We use the term learning through civic engagement and service learning. So we use the English term and the German term Lernen durch Engagement, which literally translates into learning through civic engagement. I brought you one example here from Berlin, and I give you some seconds to read it. That's a very typical and also actually was a very successful project example. It got a prize. And now someone is here. I just closed the door, sorry. And of course, as you realize, this is not yet an international example, very important topic. And this is just an insight into an international example. Since a couple of years, we encouraged international service learning projects among schools. And this is an example of a project which happened right before the European elections in June of this year, where students from Germany, a school in Germany and a school in Spain, decided to run a campaign on fake news in social media. And they did it in several subjects in their schools, ranging from politics to arts, and they cooperated on this transnational level, not with a notion of or not with a notion that one side helps the other, but to jointly support a common cause, which is democracy in Europe. So what they did is they ran a social media campaign. They also developed a peer training workshop where they informed their youngsters in their respective schools about how to identify fake news. And they also organized a panel discussion which took place in Spain. So this is just one example of European service learning projects. There are not yet dozens of them. at least not so many we know, but we have been promoting them, and we realize that more and more are popping up, and they are more and more implemented. What is at the core of our work always is to put a strong focus on the learning side of service learning, and to also put a focus on democracy competences. So we developed this brochure, which is also published in English. So whoever would like to have a look into it, you might open or download it under this link. We also have some information in English, although our main language is, of course, German. So this is just at a glance, this competence model. But what we also did together with CLACE, the Centro Latinoamericano de Aprendizaje Servicio y Servicio Solidario. I hope I pronounce it correctly, Luz. Together with Luz from CLACE, we initiated this network, which is still in the making. It's running. It's not yet professionalized, so to say. It does not have yet a website, but it's successful in strengthening the ties between service learning actors in Europe. This was the signing ceremony 2 years ago in Seville in Spain. Luz, I think, is also present with us today from our partners from CLACE. And there are many service learning actors in Germany who have built up this network. I also have a look at the time. I think I would not need more than 1 or 2 additional minutes. What is also something which we, to be honest, also tried out is to have transnational teacher trainings in this particular project, which is called Service Learning for Democracy in Europe. And when I talk about Europe, it is also important to underline that this is also kind of a political entity in which we as people being citizens of the European Union live, but as the European idea, so to say, is not limited to Europe, but actually has at its core the idea of cooperating internationally and not just randomly, but with an institution. I think this is also something which should not be limited to Europe, and which is also reflected that in our trainings, also people from all over the world were invited. There were several partners, and what we did was to organize a summer school where we brought together teachers from across Europe and the world to start thinking about joint service learning processes, about international service learning processes. I use the term processes because it is very important for us that actually students decide on their projects. So we cannot say or assume that teachers actually develop the projects, but they develop a process in how or in which they integrate their students. These are just some impressions, and I would like to close with 2 invitations. You might have a look at our online course, which was produced in this transnational program. I will share the link in 1 or 2 minutes in the chat. And there will also be an event at the end of November, unfortunately in the Central European time zone, where we will also present some results of our international work with a focus on sharing them with teachers. Catherine, back to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Felix. Your work in Europe is definitely really fascinating, and it's great to hear that Europe is developing so many service learning organizations as well, and that you're really promoting the students over there. That being said, if you could take it away, Isabella.
Hello, this is Maria Isabella's interpreter speaking. We have her on a parallel call on WhatsApp. She will speak Portuguese and I will translate her talk to you into English. Thank you. Good afternoon. It is a great pleasure to be with you. I'm going to present a little bit about the future into the past, Jogo Caminho do Futuro, a Brazilian methodology for the development of service learning projects. Firstly, I'd like to speak about the Brazilian reality. Well, the call just went down, so I'm going to have to call her again.
That's okay, I'm here.
So firstly, I'd like to talk about the Brazilian reality. Formal education in Brazil is very much focused on cognitive aspects. There is not an understanding in Brazil about service learning as a concept, and in schools, solidarity is still perceived as charity. And because of that, students are not protagonists, they are mere executors. So, in view of this situation, the strategy that we have developed at Movimento Futuro, which is where we work, is Jogo Caminho do Futuro, which is a game, which is like a learning trail into the future. It lasts for a whole school year, which is 35 classes that are given that year or take place in that year. There are 6 steps to the game. The first one is interacting, and the intention is that the students work with some emotional abilities, which are self-knowledge and awareness of a collective sphere. Because when we move into the second step, they are challenged to carry out some kind of collaborative action in their school. And all of this is important for the next 3 steps, which is where we start reassessing the service learning skills. The first one, which is to dream. In dreaming, we work with empathy. So they go out of the school walls and go into the school community to make interviews and to understand what the problems this community perceives and what are the beauties of this territory they inhabit. And then they go back into the school full of ideas, and they're then able to envisage a community-based project, also based on service learning. And they move into a first step, which is execution. And as the methodology says, we have to value the process throughout. And this is why executing starts from the first day of project execution, when they have to find a first rush to start working on that project. And then we have the contagious step, which is a very important one because it works with the organizational skills of students. Just like we celebrate they did well in maths, we have to celebrate that they have carried out an intervention project in their territories. We have to celebrate that they have actually used the knowledge they've acquired in school to build a meaningful project in their territory. So as you have realized, these projects are based on service learning methodology, precisely because the three main projects that I listed at the very beginning are projects that can be solved by means of service learning, because it allows students to be the makers of their pathway, and they allow for students to coordinate the knowledge they have so that students can build a project. And finally, you take the territory into account. So there is the planning step, another step, and the executional one. So this was the Caminho do Futuro game was planned in such a way that students could work within the school walls. And then after a lot of thinking and planning, we realized that the only requirement was for a group to be put together of people who wanted to turn the world into a better place. So there's a teacher, an educator who has before him or her a group of teenagers which are engaged into making the world a better place. And so the Caminho do Futuro game is the solution. And here, what are some of the hardships of this game and the proposals for service learning in Brazil? The first one is a lack of investment. This is the first hurdle. And the second one is the main one, which is the lack of credibility that social projects are important, especially in schools. And lastly, the issue that there are constant educational reforms that affect schools. These are some of the results. And lastly, here, if you're interested in having this game too, look us up in the social media. We have a dissemination campaign so that this game can be disseminated in 100 government schools in Brazil. And we want more and more teachers to be able to rethink their practice in their classrooms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabella, and thank you, Maria, for translating that. It's great to hear that even though in a place where service learning isn't so appreciated, that you're making great strides to include it in your community. Yeah, so thank you to our three panelists, Sarah, Felix, and Isabella, for sharing a little brief overview of their work in global service learning. So now that we have those presentations over, we're going to move into interactive Q&A sessions. These are questions that I will ask that we have prepared ourselves, but feel free to write down some questions that you have that might pop up, because in about 30 minutes or so, we'll move into our participant Q&A section. So put your questions in the chat and I'll be sure to save them for later on. Okay. So the first question that we have today is, can you each share insights about how service learning is viewed and practiced in your respective countries? Panelists, feel free to jump off of each other and kind of add on or go in or out as you'd like. But if we want someone to have volunteer, that would be amazing. Sarah, I saw your mic kind of go off if you want to start.
Yes, no, I'm absolutely. So I think it's a really good question, because in terms of like how service learning is appreciated in the US context, I do think that it's something that has increased as a pedagogy, that more and more K through 16, P through 16 organizations are using as a valid and valuable learning opportunity for young learners and students. My question, though, is like the quality by which that work is being done. And I know we'll get into this a little bit more later, but in terms of whether it's shallow, surface level, kind of technocratic, the idea that you're volunteering, which there's a benefit to volunteering, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the learning is happening. So there's there's that challenge of it could be widespread but shallow. And then to do deep service learning that is democratic and engaged and reciprocal, it takes a lot of time and planning, patience, relationship development over time. So I think it's one of those things that is universally seen as positive, and then the criticality comes in terms of the quality of how it's being kind of realized in communities. And just for my personal context, it's an essential part of our curriculum. It's something that's built in from the year one all the way through, and we have grad opportunities as well. But it is very resource intensive, time intensive. There's a lot of planning and thoughtfulness that goes into it, and there's constant relationship building to make sure that we can provide a program that is both ethical, humble, and high quality.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Definitely the depth rather than the breadth part of service learning is super important in the community. Felix, did you have any thoughts you wanted to add?
Yeah, I can share some observations actually. So I think which is very positive to see is that service learning is becoming more and more popular in Germany, um, which is visible by the fact that more ministries actually acknowledge it, that more schools integrate it into their school programs, that also, and this is very important to us, actually, service learning as a methodology is also integrated in the several phases of teacher education. And this is also something which is very important to us to support that service learning is not understood as something you can just do without any reflection, without any training. And therefore, we are very much promoting that universities integrate service learning into their teacher training and or teacher education, actually, and then also to integrate it in the second phase of teacher education, which is training and studying at the same time at schools, and then also in the continuous teacher training. And luckily, this it's actually visible that it's being more and more integrated into these structures, which is just great, and also a lot of motivation to us. Of course, service learning has not a trademark, and we're not developing any trademarks on this, so we cannot actually count each and every single service learning project, and we also do not want to do it. But I think one can conclude that it's becoming more and more popular, and I would also very much agree on what you said, Sarah. It is important that it's high quality. I think you can, I mean, teachers are the experts in their classes. So I would not say that we can tell them how to do things, not at all. But I think it is important to call service learning or to use the term service learning only for projects which are in line with the quality standards. And to us, there are six, and and I don't want to talk about all of them and too much about theory, but what is really important is that it's not understood as charity. And I think this is a common understanding we all have here, and which also applies a lot to international service learning. Yeah, this is a danger, but at the same time, I think most service learning projects we observe are of a very high quality.
Thank you for sharing. Super interesting stuff. Yeah. Isabella?
Yes, I completely agree with my colleagues. I think that it's more important to have quality and focus and to have a properly organized work inside the schools. Here in Brazil, I talked a little bit about this. We still have a charity view on solidarity, and as a learning solidarity network in Brazil, we've had to fight to have this concept improved and to actually make it a technical and correct concept of what service learning is. And what's interesting, and we've realized, especially in the training that I apply, is that schools, when they go from charity projects to service learning projects, they start receiving education awards. They start being perceived as spaces, sorry, not spaces, as institutions that actually create significant and meaningful work in their territory. Brazil is a very large country, so it's massive to be able to have this entire territory of 270 million inhabitants understand an actual improvement and a change in paradigm. But we have realized that some of specific actions, for instance, in the city of São Paulo, where I live, the curriculum of the city of São Paulo already has a provision for middle schoolers to have projects in their territories that have to be applied, and they're already called intervention projects. And so it's small changes, but it's very, very important for the advancement of the concept here in the country.
Thank you, Isabella. Yes. Great first question. I think overall takeaways I had for myself is that as a student, a high school student in America, I think I've had so many opportunities to engage in service learning thanks to great educators and change makers like the panelists we have today. And those experiences are something I'm so grateful for, and I hope that everyone on a global scale will be able to experience. They're just so educational and really make a difference to my life. So if none of the panelists have any more thoughts to add, we can move on to the second question, which is, what are some key considerations when designing service learning programs to ensure that they are ethical and mutually beneficial? What strategies have been effective for fostering genuine cross-cultural collaboration and avoiding a savior mentality? Sarah, would you like to start us off?
Sure, I can definitely do that. Well, I think I mentioned a bit about my context at WPI and some of the training that we do. I would say that one important kind of touchstone for us, and I know for the field, so back up for a second. I am one of the co-directors you mentioned earlier, Catherine, of the Community-Based Global Learning Collaborative. And that's a network of institutions internationally, mostly higher ed, but then also some community organizations and third-party providers who are focused on trying to scale this idea of ethical community-based global learning, which is right in line with a sister concept of the global service learning. And the model that we look at is the Hartman model, along with other collaborators, called fair trade learning. And that has some kind of just touchstone pieces around reciprocal partnerships. And then it also gets into the nitty gritty details about also the economics. So thinking through, if you're working alongside of a community and learning in tandem with a community, you have to be focused on epistemic justice, the fact that many ways of knowing will make the work better and also transform everybody who is in partnership. The idea that if you're learning things about the issues that face a community, it should be changing the way in which you see the world and then the actions that you take as a civic agent. So, yeah, if I learn about things in the Worcester community and I feel deep resonance with that, it's going to change the way that I vote, that I might invest my money, that I might purchase things in the community. If I'm talking about economic justice and trying to support local social entrepreneurship, I'm not going to be spending my money at a big box store. I would like that to go into the Worcester community. And that would be the same in our community partners in Berlin or Reykjavik or in Windhoek, Namibia. So that fair trade learning perspective of centering community voice, of investing in the community in terms of time, talent, and material resources, that constant critical evaluation and reflection, and really pressing up against power dynamics in our histories that have put us into the contexts that service learning is both an important, tangible, and learning opportunity, are all aspects of that experience. And so it takes place throughout the entire spectrum of the experience, in the preparation, in the ongoing reflection that's happens throughout the experience, and then the post reflection to help students make meaning of, what did I learn? How has that changed me? How will I be different in the future as a global citizen?
Great. Yeah, I think you really touched on, I guess, the learning aspect of service learning and how it's crucial to account for the ethical portions of that and learning about what's happening within our community so that we can use that to be civic agents out and make our own contributions. So thank you, Sarah, for that. Felix, would you like to add on?
Yeah, I try. I think what is extremely important to pay attention to the construction of relations. And what is important to us is that when schools cooperate with service learning, that they are both equals. So it's not a constellation in which one side is the donor and the other side is the beneficiary, or the one side is the actor and the other side is more passive. I think this is also like kind of natural when you put the focus on the learning side, and also think of intercultural competences. So we as an organization or actors here in Europe, we have not yet come across these constellations of there is a school trying to help another school, but it's, as I said before, rather the constellation we also encourage is that two groups collaboratively work together on a joint cause, which can be directed at a certain target group. It could be a value, a social value or something. And therefore, I think we avoid the risk of having this savior mentality. And we touched upon the question of charity, and I think that charity is like mostly viewed as something negative. And I think many people have special or certain feelings when they think of charity, and many are negative. But what is also important to us to work competence oriented, which in my perspective means that if there are, so to say, simple ideas, we want to help other people. That this is, of course, not something bad, and you can encourage it, but it should not stop at this level. But you should then see how, and with your teaching, you can upgrade these experiences on a more competence-oriented level, and use these use empathy, other values also to reflect on more on bigger questions, more social questions, the how power is distributed, how like history made some parts of the world into the situation right now, and so on. Yeah, these are the things which come into my mind when you've raised these questions, Catherine.
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I just want to add on to that. It's also, especially when we're teaching in these circumstances, to really actively emphasize the partnership development and roles discussions and normalize that throughout the experience. I really liked what Felix had mentioned about, hinting towards like that collaboration, co-creation, and sometimes as co-educators too. And if you're helping the students develop ways of teaming and communicating, and then also modeling that for them, I think it really does help with that power diffusion and that partnership.
Yeah, considering those, I guess, power dynamics within service learning so important, and definitely including collaboration is a great way to handle that, I think. Um, Isabella, do you like to add your thoughts as well?
No, I completely agree with what my colleagues said. I think that to be able to make that passage between a charity project to an actual solidarity project is a really hard switch to flip. And it's really nice when we're able to make that switch because sometimes I feel like doing charity work is a beneficial work. You have the pleasure of taking a photo for Instagram. Look at how many children I've helped. But if we live in a global world, in a world where everyone has rights, if we live in a world where everyone should be seen as equal, then we should also be treating the other people as equals. And when we put that person in a position where they're going to receive these things, then we're feeling better than them. And that switch is really hard to switch, especially in countries that are as unequal as Brazil is, to make sure that people understand this space of privilege that they have, and that we actually need to make sure that everyone is seen with equal eyes is a big challenge. So I'm just reflecting upon everything that was said. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isabella. This conversation leads really well into our next question that focuses on trust and sustainable relationships. So the question is, what are some best practices for building trust and sustainable relationships within your communities? How do you measure and evaluate the local impact on local communities over time? This question really reminds me of your presentation earlier, Isabella. And since your community doesn't have a lot of focus on service learning nowadays, I would love to hear your thoughts on how you're helping to build trust and relationships within those communities, to help support your missions.
I very much like to say that in teacher training, teachers have to understand that there are two times. There's one of the relationship with the community, which is invisible, which is for maturing to go out and build trust and to make the community understand how they can cooperate. And there's a time for the project itself. And usually you cannot in the project say the time that is invested in maturing the relationships. And this also leaves teachers a little bit frustrated because the time for maturing the relationship is painstaking and time consuming. You have to go out and show that you want to do something real and serious. And some teachers are a bit too direct and they want to go straight into project execution and force things. And why am I saying all this? Because if we do not care for this relationship, if we don't go into this step of dreaming with the community, as we showed in the game, we will not be able to move ahead because there will always be someone in our relationship who will be in an unequal relationship, someone giving something and someone receiving something. If we cannot have a level playing field, the project will not take off in a solidarity basis and in service learning. In order to do the assessment, we have to take all steps into account and we have to assess service to assess learning itself. Are my students learning what they should in maths and geography or whatever? And the other point is an assessment about service learning. What is what I'm doing meaningful in learning terms? Do I have a good relationship with the community? Are other students engaging? Me as a teacher, am I stepping out of this role of being the leader, and am I really exchanging and asking and letting the students be the protagonists, the main actors? So as I assess learning, I also have to assess service learning, and the two of them go hold in hand. So this is a huge challenge. Sorry, in my experience, my teachers tend to focus on just cognitive learning and forget about or disregard service learning. And so service learning ends up being not as meaningful as it should be. I think I should stop here.
Thank you, Isabella. Great ideas about the teacher and student relationship and really supporting the service learning aspects of their education. Sarah, Felix, if you have any ideas, feel free to pop in. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
I'll just say resourcing is another piece. I know that that sounds maybe very crass or very logistical, but I do think that you resource what you value. And if you're building partnerships and you're expecting community partners and from the university or from the school side to be so integrative and to be so transformational in this space, you should be compensating in some way. And that can be negotiated and honored through what is normal and expected for the community partner. But that's one of those things that I feel like gets lost oftentimes. Yeah, so a little thing, but a big thing. Felix, did you have something as well? I saw you unmuted.
Well, just very quickly, because we are not a school, we are not an institute, and of course we observe and also measure service learning practices, but not so much on a focus on the impact of the community. So this is actually a point where I cannot tell you so much. We are really strongly focusing on the learning side. But of course, I agree with everything you said. The community should not and never be used as an opportunity to learn. That's, of course, essential and would be dangerous, actually, if such constellations would take place.
Thank you. Okay, so our next question is, what emerging trends or opportunities do you see for the future of service learning? And all three of our panelists are great change makers who are making great strides for the future of service learning in their respective countries. But I was wondering if maybe we could start off with Felix and kind of get the European perspective on this.
Yeah, I would perhaps differentiate a little bit between observations and our hopes. And I think what is an observation is that there are more and more educational decision makers, luckily, which have understood that for the 21st century, you need competences and not merely knowledge. And I think this is a trend which actually supports service learning a lot, because it is a methodology which allows students to gain on a variety of competences. So I think this puts some wind into our sails, so to say. And then also this might be actually strengthened by the fact of our changing societies in so many terms. And I'm thinking particularly of digitalization and AI, that like so many teachers are asking, how can I actually assess my students if I never know whether something is coming out of their own mind or whether it's just from ChatGPT or something. And I think this supports project-based learning and experiential learning in general, but also service learning in particular, because of course you could and might use AI for designing your projects. I mean, from a student perspective, but of course you actually have to implement and you reflect upon these projects, and there I think AI cannot help you much. So this might also be something which is going into the right direction. And what we are hoping for and advocating for is something I already mentioned before, to institutionalize service learning. And we've seen some progress in our country, in other countries, but I think this is actually essential because if you want to scale service learning in at least in our country, we cannot do it as we've done so far with a lot of support for individual teachers. The institutions have to step in as well, and of course, we also have to reach more and more teachers and trust them that they actually implement service learning in the right manner. And on another note, not regarding service learning in general, but international service learning, and this is just anecdotal evidence almost, that there's a lot of interest in German schools to use service learning to work together with the schools in other parts of the world and in Europe. This is really something which also to a certain extent surprised us. There are so many teachers asking me, sending emails, hey, we would like to cooperate with a school from another country. Can you help me out? And I don't know how sustainable this development is, but this is also something which at least could support international and European service learning here in Germany.
Thank you. Yes, you touched on many of the trends and the unavoidable question of AI in the world. So with that being said, I'd like to keep some time open for the Q&A from the participants. Thank you everyone for posting your questions on the chat already. We only have time for 2 questions from the chat today, so I will just start from the top. This is from Heather. She says, I'm interested to hear the panelists' view on short-term service learning projects. For example, it's not uncommon for high school students to attend a community service experience during their summer break. So maybe panelists, if you could contrast short-term versus long-term service learning and kind of discuss how length is involved in that. If anyone would like to take the question, feel free to do so.
I mean, I can speak from my own experience, and and you mentioned it earlier, and we've talked a little bit about this. There is a spectrum of the way in which we engage, and there are benefits to each. And sometimes the short term can be like that first step onto real eye-opening, interesting new opportunities for students. And again, that's very student-centered. But in the back of that, one of the things that I think is really beneficial is having long-term partnerships with organizations so students can fit into when those opportunities come up. And it might be a short-term opportunity for the students, but the relationship between maybe the school and the community partner or multiple community partners is one that's built on reciprocity and trust and a long-term relationship so that it doesn't feel like it's a drop-in, it's sustainable. And people don't feel like you were there for a short amount of time, you made relationships with people and you vanished. So like that continuity, I feel is really important. And if you can't have that continuity, I'm very skeptical about those types of experiences that are dip in, dip out, because I think that they're harmful to the community. I think that the relationships can be very fraught and fragile. And I don't know that the students get the experience. Again, it could be transformative in some ways, but in terms of the preparation and the long lastingness. So I think my 2 advocacy pieces there are build the relationships outside and make sure that there's a good working connection. And then the experience itself should have a lot of reflection and a lot of also kind of signaling to the students of like, this is not ideal to only go for a short amount of time. Be aware and be humble and be on, try not to make yourself the star of the show for this short period of time.
Yeah, thank you. I think even in my experience, I see a world of difference between like going to volunteer for somewhere, just like for a few short days versus really being able to work with the organization long term and build those relationships and skills that I'll need. So thank you, Sarah. Um, Felix, Isabella, any thoughts?
Please go ahead, Isabella.
Okay, I can try. Sorry, Felix, did you want to go? Okay, I can try. I'm kind of in line with what Sarah was saying. I think that the intentionality is different. I don't see that in a month you're able to make it your students see something that is going to be a solidarity project. You can do different projects. You can maybe work on a prototype, and then in 1 month they will create this prototype, or to think about, okay, we're gonna, in our school nucleus, we're going to try and solve a problem, and then it's in a academic field and more in a school structure without a significant relationship. So I agree with what Sarah is saying that when we do these things that are so quickly, then it feels like we're using our community partner, right? And that kind of removes all of the proposal of horizontality that been trying to defend so far. Maybe what I would say is the first question would be, what is the intention between this good deed? What are you trying to make sure your students learn? Maybe that will answer the question. So if you're trying to see that they might learn in 1 month what the methodology is behind solidarity learning, then they're not going to learn it in a month. They're going to understand different things about the process, but if you want to try and find an answer based on a specific problem, maybe they can learn that in a month. So it's important to really understand why you're trying to do what you're trying to do and find the significance.
Thank you, Isabella. Um, So that concludes our first question from the Q&A. This next one will be our last question of the day. I'm just looking at the time. But please feel free if you have any more questions that you'd like to ask the panelists, please send them our way to NYLC and we'll redirect those. And also just reach out through social media, email, and we'll try to get those answers to you. But this last question comes from Leah. She asks, are there other ways you encourage buy-in on an institutional level that motivates teachers' work? Now, I will repost the question in the chat as well.
Well, I could start. On an institutional level, I think apart from offering education on service learning, as I said in the 3 phases of teacher education, I think it's also important that service learning is acknowledged in education policies, in programs, and in educational programs ran by the state, in school programs. So this is something we also lobby for, which I think makes the life of teachers easier also when they try to convince their principals, directors at schools, the head of schools. So this is something more. And then I think what's also becoming more and more important is to strengthen the ties between teachers who work with service learning. But and I think there are also many more things which help to help this buy-in. But I'm not sure at the moment whether they are on the institutional level or sometimes also more informal or provided by the civil society. So I'll leave it at that, and perhaps you can add to this.
I think my mind went very much to like procedural, and I wrote some things in the chat, so I'll try not to duplicate what I said there. But I've been thinking a lot about the spaces that we oftentimes don't think about in terms of mobilizing the message of what our work does. So in terms of evaluation and assessment of programs, annual reports, newsletters, the ways in which you might connect the stories of what went well, but also like signal the values that we've been talking about of intentionality and humility. For anybody that's worked at an organization that has marketing and communications, for instance, some of those like swoop in white savior excitement messages can be really internalized in those because folks are trying to show the goodness of the organization, but it's also dehumanizing to communities. So we've been doing a lot of work with our marketing and communications with folks across the institution to make sure it's signaling the type of humble, responsible engagement that we have, but then also highlighting the real wins and benefits and tangibles. And so that, like I said, newsletters, internal lunch and learns and things that we do on campus. And then if there are opportunities to intersect with board members or folks who are in decision-making positions, to know that this work is valid and valuable. So anyways, I think that is one of those other culture building and community building pieces that are really important to sustaining this work.
Thank you, Sarah and Felix, for that question. So I think that will conclude our Q&A section of today's
Sorry,
panel.
can I make a comment?
Yes, please, Isabella.
I just wanted to add something. The director or the principal makes the school. If a principal doesn't believe that a service learning project is important, however motivated the teacher is, it's going to become isolated. They're going to have to do everything by themselves. The more the principal supports it and the more institutionalized that practice is, more significant it is, be it for the teachers, the students, or the community itself. So I think that the fight is for institutionality. At least in my experience, that's the case. All the projects where the principal was helpful and was supportive and was working with us, where they actually said, let's work together. These are the projects that actually transform the territory. When it's the teacher that's always fighting or trying to go against the tide, then that project passes away and there's no continuity. So there isn't an institutionality there. And so that's the add-on that I wanted to add. Sorry that I interrupted you, Catherine.
No problem, Isabella. Really insightful stuff. So I know we're running out of time and I want to be respectful of everyone's time today. So I will just ask our three panelists to give a brief kind of summary overview of their thoughts today and key takeaways. And then after that, we'll go on to concluding remarks. So Sarah, if you'd start us off.
Sure. Oh, I just want to say thank you again for having me today. And I think if you take away just a couple of important things, it's that focus on intentionality of trying to build partnerships with communities and within your institutions as well that advances this work in an ethical and sustainable way. That reflection really needs to be throughout the entirety of the process, and that means not just the students, but also in our professional communities to keep pushing the work forward. And then finally, I think there's so many things on the horizon, and there's going to be so much need to do this work well to really tackle some of our biggest global grand challenges. And so it is an iterative process. It's always growing. We're always learning what we're doing right and not so right. So just keep staying open to this learning community and having this space with NYLC and others to share learnings, I think is just critical. So thank you again for this.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah. Felix?
Well, I'm still in the process of digesting all the information I got today, and Actually, I just wanted to say that I'm very grateful for this opportunity. I'm also to learn from you, Sarah and Isabella, and from all your valuable questions. And this is actually my key takeaway and motivation to learn more about also what you are actually doing in global international service learning. And yeah, that's my main takeaway.
Thank you. Isabella?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm very excited to be here representing my country. Thank you, Sarah and Felix, exchanging the ideas. And thank you so much, Catherine, for your mediation. What I wanted to say was to do a solidarity project. Sometimes they happen in early childhood learning. So if you're there and involved in trying to do something for your community and working with your community, just get into this mission. Try and work out with the relationships, make it so that the students are actually the protagonists of this process. And then also believe in the times. It's not always going to be easy. It's going to be hard to do the partnership with communities that I said initially. But if you truly believe in a more collaborative world, then you have to take that first step and start with a collaboration. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isabella. Well, thank you so much to our three amazing panelists for coming out today amidst the time differences and the kind of Zoom difficulties. So we really appreciate your global perspectives on service learning and helping promote the next generation of young people like me, and also the educators and the issues out there. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it off to Amy to give some concluding remarks and kind of close the session for us. But thank you so much, and I've had a great time facilitating today.
Thank you all so much. Just an amazing job. I want to thank everyone for joining us, for being part of this powerful discussion. We hope the panel has inspired you and sparked new ideas on how you can uplift youth leadership and advance service learning globally. Before we close, I do just want to put in a few ideas into hopefully into your agenda. So NYLC has some exciting events coming up, so we can keep this momentum going. So March 26th through the 28th, we'll be hosting the National Service Learning Conference in St. Paul, Minnesota. It's an inspiring gathering that brings together young leaders, educators, community organizations, nonprofit professionals from around the globe. So it's an invaluable opportunity to dive into the latest strategies and innovations in youth leadership and service learning. So we hope you'll join us here in Minnesota. Additionally, we have some additional thought leader sessions coming up. February 5th, we have Cultivating Change Makers, a panel discussion on youth leadership. Then on March 12th, in celebration of Civic Learning Week, we have Voices of Change panel, Service Learning and Civic Engagement. So some great opportunities to hear from other leading experts from around the globe. Again, I want to thank our panelists for your energy, your insights, your dedication to this work. A special shout out to our interpreters. They did a great job. Thank you so much. And of course to you, Catherine, for your amazing facilitation and insights. We look forward to seeing the impact that each of you will continue to make in your communities and beyond. And together, let's keep pushing forward. We need to build a world where young people have these service learning experiences and can not only learn and grow, but can create lasting change in our communities. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day.